So let's take a look at let's sorry, let's take a look at some impressionist works and see some of the great pieces that we can look at. We have to start with Monet, of course. He really is considered the father of Impressionism, and Impression Sunrise is considered the first Impressionist piece. And Impressionism actually comes from the critics coming to see this piece at the Impressionist show and saying, "What? The artwork isn't even finished. It's just an impression." Which leads us to how a lot of people talk about Impressionism is, again, it's not real art because it's like a sketch, it's unfinished. And Monet and other artists were like, no, that's the point. We want it to be this unfinished, momentary glimpse of something. Sunrise is an ongoing event. I'm showing you one little glimpse of that moment. I'm showing you the idea of something changing rapidly over time. So critics weren't a big fan of Impressionism in the early days. I know people love it now, but they were really like, no, this is bad stuff. But Monet and the other artists said, you want to make fun of us? Well, we're just going to use Impressionism as the actual title for our movement, make it into something positive. So this is one of the first works that we see. And again, we already spoke a little bit about, how you're supposed to kind of look at this with your own eyes and process it your own way. But you're supposed to see these dabs of paint as the water rippling, right? The sort of idea of the boat, right? The boats on the water, the harbor in the background, things emerging and disappearing, right? The Rouen Cathedral series I mentioned, he lived across the street, so the idea of painting this over and over again and thinking about the conditions and how they change and how it affects the finished product he's going to make as well. Or someone like Renoir, who is looking at the idea of an impressionist party. And when I look at this painting, I always think about people kind of circulating and coming and going, and the sort of energy, that's filtering through the painting. But also the technique. Look at the jacket of the man whose back is turned to us and the splotches of light, that we read as the dappling of light coming through trees. But, again, you have to think about how critics saw this as very unfinished, splotchy, messy painting. And it was very revolutionary for what they were doing to show things in flux or things in movement. The sort of cousin to Impressionism, of course, is Post-Impressionism. And here we look at some of the same technical approaches, but color is used very emotionally in these works. Probably the most famous of the Post-Impressionists is Toulouse-Lautrec. Toulouse-Lautrec, by the way, is a confusing artist sometimes because some people think he's an impressionist. Some people say he's a post-impressionist. It's confusing. No one's really in agreement. Your book kind of has him lumped over here, so I'm just going with that. Other books have him lumped with the impressionists, so it's a difficult thing. Art's not easy sometimes. Here at the Moulin Rouge piece, though, this idea of using these vibrant colors to show you this sort of underbelly, right, of the Parisian dance hall scene. Renoir, you'll notice, is really happy and kind of bubbly. This is kind of frightening and dark. So again, the color can be used to kind of sway you in a different direction, right, than Renoir may have wanted to take you in, to show you kind of the seediness, perhaps, of the dance hall life. And Toulouse-Lautrec was very well known for being one of the first artists to think about, like, how do you make money in the art for art's sake world? And he did a lot of advertising, actually. So that's what he did to make some cash, right, to fund his art. Van Gogh, very famous post-impressionist, for his, background, basically. And I won't go into it, but, he has a very turbulent life and ends up committing suicide. And he seems drawn to places like the night cafe that he paints here, where he said, one can ruin oneself, go mad, or commit a crime. Notice the emotional use of color here as well, where he creates this sort of reds and golds and greens that we get this feeling of like a toxic environment, a scary environment that we're not quite sure whether we want to hang out or we want to run away. Starry Night, of course, is one of his most famous works. And many people think he was sort of trying to find a way to connect to humanity with this piece. He actually painted it when he was in the asylum. He self-committed himself to an asylum many times. And he was looking out his window when he paints this piece. And many people think, is it a way for him to try to connect himself to the world outside of himself? It seems that there was a storm raging inside of him, and he painted it, with these vibrant colors and the swirling paint strokes. So you can see where Impressionism influences Post-Impressionism, and the colors, right, become more animated in this style. Gauguin, who was friends with Van Gogh famously, these are some of the works he did after he left Van Gogh in France and went to Tahiti that deal with the Tahitian natives. And again, I mostly show them here to you for the use of the color and the post-impressionist spirit. But you can look further into their backgrounds and look into colonialism and the impact of colonialism on subjects like this, when you see the French interacting with colonial natives. So there's a deeper kind of, layer here, right, about colonialism and the peoples that you contact. But look at the use of the colors here in the water. So again, it's not really about reality. We're seeing now how arbitrary color can come into the mix. This is something to keep in mind, right, as we go on to the next chapter as well.